Welcome to G.I. Joe Chronicles, Outpost Edition.
I trust your mission was equally well executed.
I want a stone cold righteous attention.
Militarily speaking, it's only fair to say that Cobra Commander is a world-class buffoon.
Hello, troops. I am Jim Meal, also known as Jim the Joe Junkie, and welcome to G.I. Joe Chronicles Outpost Episode 14, where we will chronologically discuss the toys, comics, cartoons, and many other aspects of G.I. Joe, a Real American Hero, which is my favorite pop culture subject. Without getting too bogged down in details, just my co-hosts and I having a conversation and reminiscing. And joining me today to discuss these classic comics is DJ Kristatos, Pat Sampson. How are you doing today, Pat? And what kind of special mission have you been on lately?
Well, Jim, I am doing fine, and I'm glad you asked. A special mission that I've been on is I've actually got this special invite to a really cool club, kind of a clan, so to say, that I got invited to. Don't tell Jared. They want me to be part of it. They think I got some special skills. Don't tell Delvin either that, I've been secretly doing my own jujitsu, but don't tell him.
Your secret's safe with me.
Oh, I appreciate that, Jim. I'm torn. I don't know what I want to do. Do I want to join them? Do I not want to join them? I really don't know yet. So they said I could be a master. So I'm hoping someday I can be.
It doesn't have to be a silent master.
No.
Oh,
no.
Okay.
No, yeah. I haven't figured out what my actual name before the master would be. We'll figure it out.
Why don't you figure that out? Let us know later while I let you know what my special mission has been. Well, this is that time continuum thing. It's going to be in my future, but when the show comes out, it's going to be in the past.
Oh.
I've been slinging toys and video games and comic books on eBay and the shows to get ready for the Codename Iowa show on November 8th and 9th, where I will happen to see our special guest, first time on the show, Doug Dellow. How you doing?
Hello, Jim and Pat. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Pretty excited. But yes, I will be at Assembly Required, Codename
Yes.
Iowa. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you there and seeing everybody there.
Since this is your first time at the Outpost, Doug, how about giving us some background on how you became a fan of G.I. Joe? Was it through the toys, comics, cartoons, or something else that nobody else has come through?
So the short answer is the toys. Around 82, 83, I went to a friend's house, and he had most of the 82 collection of toys, and we played with them that day, and I had a really good time and was impressed with all of the guns and backpacks and helmets and just all of the accessories. I thought that was cool. And, of course, their knees bent and their elbows bent, and it was, amazing. So I was really excited about all these, and most of my Star Wars toys were pretty broken by then. So I went to the local Kmart and picked up Short Fuse and Airborne off the shelf and brought those home. And from there, I was just hook, line, and sinker into the toys.
Were they on Blue Light Special?
They were not on Blue Light Special.
Or did you get a sub while you were there? Oh, I love the Kmart subs.
Oh, I don't remember those.
Yeah. They had the deli contestant or the little candy shop in the Kmart.
Yeah. Our Kmart had a cafeteria in it.
Yeah, slushies and all that. Oh, man.
So I was from a smaller town, so I don't think that that our Kmart had all of that.
Yeah. Missing out, man.
But then I got into the comic books much later. In fact, the comic books we're going to talk about, number 27 is the first comic book I ever bought as a child. So I'm very excited to talk about them today.
And that's part of the reason why you were chosen for this episode. Well, thanks for sharing, Doug. Pat, what are we looking forward to this episode?
Well, Jim, I'm glad you asked. This episode, we will be discussing the Marvel Comics issues number 24 through 27 from 1984. As we go forward, we will attempt to stay in the calendar year that the comics were released in. But we will adjust the issues that we will be covering if we need to, so that multiple issue stories are covered in the same episode. And we may not be reviewing the entirety of every issue either. We will be discussing some highlights of the issues. We are covering favorite moments, favorite covers, new characters, characters that pay the ultimate sacrifice, and whatever else we feel like discussing. To make sure that we are giving each issue some attention, we will go through each issue and state the issue title, creative team, a brief description of the story in that issue. We will be getting our information from yojo.com and 3djoes.com, so thank you for that. Previous episodes, we would read all the issues, then discuss our highlights. But with the narrative of the stories in these particular issues, we are going to break these comics issues up into two different discussion segments. So let's begin with the synopsis of issue 24 and 25.
Thank you, Pat. So as you said, we'll start with issue 24, The Commander Escapes. Script by Larry Hama, art by Russ Heath, colors by George Roussos, editor Denny O'Neil, editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, and cover artist Mike Zeck and John Beatty.
Zick, 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 Beatty, zick. Zick, 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 Beatty, zick.
I figured that was coming.
I had to do it.
You had to do it for Jared,
Keep
right?
the tradition, yep.
All right. Synopsis: Duke, Rock and Roll, Roadblock, Gung Ho, Grunt, and one prisoner parachute onto a plateau high in the Rockies. With the help of their prisoner, Cobra Commander, the Joes begin assembling their prefab fortress. Meanwhile, at Cobra headquarters, Destro is surprised when both Major Blood and the Baroness arrive. The three of them discuss how they can take over Cobra, but they must first determine how to find and eliminate Cobra Commander. They hire two mysterious men, Wild Weasel and Firefly, to track him down. As Cobra Commander is explaining to the Joes why they cannot take his helmet off without the proper code, he neglects to tell them about the short-range radio receiver that is built into his helmet. Once Storm Shadow finds Cobra Commander, he communicates to him through the short-range radio in his helmet, telling the Commander to find a way to get outside. As Grunt and Rock and Roll escort the Commander outside for his constitutional, Storm Shadow, using the Cobra Claw, attacks the Joes and grabs the Commander. But not for long, as Roadblock with his Ma-Deuce shoots at and hits the fuel tanks on the Claw. As the Commander flies off, leaving Storm Shadow to cover his escape, Duke opens a crate that was delivered with a prefab base. What was in the crate? A new Joe vehicle, the Skyhawk. Duke pursues the Commander only for him to escape in the same transport plane that delivered Storm Shadow. After a hand-to-hand fight between Roadblock, Gung Ho, and Storm Shadow injures Gung Ho, but Roadblock is able to take Storm Shadow by surprise and captures him. The Joes find a shipping receipt and wonder why Storm Shadow would ship something to Chokoloskee, Florida, which is where the homing device led Firefly and Wild Weasel, a shack in the middle of a swamp, a shack that Cobra Commander knows the owner of, and very quickly Firefly and Weasel are introduced to Zartan.
All right, I'll take us through issue number 25, titled Zartan. The script was by Larry Hama, pencils by Frank Springer, inks Mike Gustovic, lettering goes to Rick Parker, colors go to George Roussos, editor was Denny O'Neil, editor-in-chief is Jim Shooter, cover artist is, again, the one, the only, Mike Zeck and John Beatty. That's Zeck and Beatty. Beatty, Zeck, and Beatty. And the synopsis goes like this. Short Fuse and Roadblock escort Storm Shadow to Alcatraz, where a solitary cell is waiting for him. And Roadblock warns Storm Shadow that he is safe while he is in his cell, but he is on his own once Storm Shadow breaks out. In Florida Everglades, Destro, Baroness, and Cobra Commander are traveling to meet a new mercenary called Zartan. They all arrive at a very unassuming shack, but all is not what it seems as Zartan reveals his high-tech headquarters. Not too far away in the Gulf of Mexico, while Bill and Zap go over their plan to recon and locate the tracking device in hopes it will lead to Cobra Commander. The mission includes 2 Dragonfly helicopters loaded down with Joes, including some new team members, Mutt and Junkyard, Tripwire, Cutter, and Deep Six in the Shark. Snake Eyes makes a visit to Gung Ho at the Bethesda Naval Hospital. Seeing Snake Eyes' tattoo, Gung Ho comments that the ninja that cut him up had the same one. Hawk is informed that there is a connection between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. He lets Duke know that Storm Shadow is more dangerous than they realize. Back at Zartan's swamp shack, Zartan instructs his dreadnoughts to release Firefly and Wild Weasel. He then explains how he was able to anticipate Wild Weasel and Firefly paying him a visit. He also reveals one of his special abilities. He can mimic color and surface patterns, similar to a chameleon. Soon, Buzzer informs Zartan that some helicopters are coming in. He suggests giving Firefly an opportunity to redeem himself and investigate the incoming aircraft. Wild Bill and Zap drop off Mutt and Junkyard, Torpedo and Tripwire, who are able to take cover before Wild Weasel and Firefly in the water moccasin spots the two Dragonfly helicopters. They attack the Dragonfly, not realizing a squad of Joes were making a way to Zartan's cabin. The battle between the water moccasin and the Dragonfly rage on, and it doesn't look good for the Joes until Deep Six and the Shark intervene and take out the water moccasin. And to be expected with so many egos and strong personalities, the Cobra leaders begin to threaten each other. In the end, Zartan is required to show a proof of loyalty. With the help of Junkyard, the Joes track down Firefly and Wild Weasel and take him into custody. But then Junkyard runs off to a nearby shack, and when the door opens, it's Zartan and his pistol pointed at Junkyard. Both the Dragonflies and the Shark make it back to the G.I. Joe freighter. Wild Bill attempts to thank Deep Six, but Deep Six ignores him, and Wild Bill is a little frustrated. As Duke, Steeler, and Roblox check in on Storm Shadow, the cell is empty. How did Storm Shadow escape from a sealed, locked, windowless room?
Thank you, Pat. With issue 24 and 25 details out of the way, we're going to move on to our first segment called Supporting the Troops.
He's an evil master of disguise. Zartan changes color right before your eyes. Zartan.
These two issues introduce many new characters and our first animal companion. So let's each pick a few of our favorite characters and how Larry used them in the storyline. To get this started, here are the characters that were introduced during these issues. For the Joes, there was Cutter, Mutt and Junkyard, Deep Six, and Tripwire. For the Cobras, the new characters were Firefly, Wild Weasel, Zartan, Buzzer, Ripper, and Torch. Doug, I'll let you go first. Who would you like to discuss?
Well, there's a lot of good characters, and it was really hard to decide. I guess I want to discuss the Dreadnoks kind of as a whole. For example, if you read in 24, there's a guy on a bike watching McGuire Air Force Base, and it was kind of a foreshadowing of the Dreadnoks coming, right? It was really cool to see that, going back and reading these issues for getting ready for the podcast and thinking, oh yeah, so he already knew. We get Zartan and the Dreadnoks in these episodes all together, and we didn't get the toys that way. So it was really cool to kind of think about that, and that Larry already knew and had a plan for all of that together. Very cool to see the Dreadnoks. I loved it.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up too, that issue 24, what I would assume was a Dreadnought or a biker out there at McGuire Airfield. Now, do you guys remember there was 2 episodes in the 30s where they stole Zartan's bike?
Yeah.
Yep.
That bike with the skull on the side, it looks like Zartan's motorcycle. I had the same thought, Doug.
So maybe it's not a Dreadnought. Maybe it's actually Zartan.
Maybe. But I don't know how we got from McGuire all the way down.
Maybe it's a Dreadnought in training that we just don't know about yet.
You brought up a good point too, Doug, because we got Zartan figure in 84, but we got the Dreadnoughts in 85. The construction of the Dreadnought figures in 85 were still the construction of the figures from 84. Because in 85, they went from just the swivel neck in 84 to the ball neck in 85. But the Dreadnought still had the swivel neck. So they were intended to release in 84, but got delayed somehow.
And that's what's kind of interesting about seeing them come in the comics together, because we know from that ball neck joint that they really were all intended to come out at the same time.
All right. Anything on the Dreadnoughts, Pat?
No, I think they're an interesting group that are brought in to see that they are just kind of like henchmen for Zartan is interesting. And just to see that, later on, like especially that issue that you mentioned, it's coming up in the 30s, and that you get a little more character from them, right? A little more interest in each one of them particularly. And, they all play a bigger part in this whole Cobra universe or Joe universe that is here. I'll talk about Zartan a little bit, how cool he was as a character. Very mysterious, especially in these issues. You're still kind of figuring, okay, what's this guy? What's he all about? Why has he got this little secret area here? Obviously, he's got a gang of people, right? Who else does he have? And what can he all do? You can see that he can do some changing. You know, if you were a kid, you kind of knew that from the toy that was kind of coming out, and I believe there was like an ad of, you know, meet Zartan and blah, blah, blah. And he would, you know, put him in the sunlight and he changes color. Interesting to see him develop as a character here, and just, wow, what they do with him down the road is, and continue to do with him in the other series, is just amazing test of a character. Obviously, he can change into many different things, and it's a character that just changed with the times as well, too, you know, blending in and doing what he needs to do to make his presence known.
Yeah, it's ironic that he's introduced in issue 20, well, a cameo in 24 and then full in 25.
Yeah.
And then the Snake Eyes Origins, which we'll be discussing 26, 27. And later on in the 40s, Larry ties him into the Snake Eyes Origin and Storm Shadow. So it, as you said, it just continues.
And I know that all the interviews of Larry say that he makes this up as he goes along and he doesn't have a plan long term, but you got to wonder if he had it in the back of his mind what he's going to use Zartan for in a much later issue, because it is funny that they introduce Zartan and then we start the Snake Eyes origin.
Yeah, that is interesting.
All right. I'm going to take one for the team here. I'm going to take Deep Six. As many know, I'm not a big fan of Deep Six, the figure, but I like how Larry was able to, he writes characters in different ways. It's not everybody has the same personality. And he carried over from Deep Six's file card that he was very monotone, very just low key. And I thought it was hilarious when Wild Bill was trying to thank him and Deep Six just ignored him and walked right on by. I thought it was a good introduction for Deep Six because not very personable, but he can get the job done. He helped the dragonflies in the swamp. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah, I think so too. I like the character of Deep Six that Larry introduces. And I know that as a kid, we all were like, why couldn't we have Deep Six, how he drew him on the USS Jane, right? With the cap and the outfit, right? Fully articulated instead of the one that we got in the Shark, right? Because the character would have been fun to play with just because he's such a cold fish, right?
Doug, how about you grab another one?
So I'm going to pick Mutt and Junkyard. That was an early figure I got to, and I really like dogs, and I loved the juxtaposition of Mutt versus Junkyard, and Junkyard is the smart one, and Mutt is kind of the what's going on, and Larry really leaned into that in these issues. I played with him a lot as a kid. He was always out there doing something, and I always had Junkyard being the smarter one, even though at the 3 3/4 scale, he wasn't very articulate like they do with the new ones, but I played with those two a lot. I loved that character, and I loved how they used Junkyard and how smart he was.
Yeah, I agree with that. Junkyard was a figure that I had as well as a kid, Junkyard and Mutt. Just that camaraderie between a guy and his dog. And like you said, which one was smarter? Well, it leaned more towards Junkyard a little bit, but Mutt had his time. He wasn't dumb at all either. So just that friendship that the two have.
That's what I was going to say, Pat. The friendship they have, how close they are. The Junkyard was looking out for Mutt and the rest of the Joes when he was tricking the Cobras.
But you also know, too, is Mutt is always looking out for his dog and really sometimes over the Joes, right? That's his battle buddy. That's his guy that he needs to make sure he's taken care of.
Yeah, for sure, especially as the issues go on, right? You see a lot more of that because Junkyard makes quite a few appearances on covers and such.
There's one issue with actually the Dreadnoks. I don't remember what the number was. Buzzer injures Junkyard while they're battling, and Mutt was not happy about that.
Right.
All right, Pat, who you got next?
I'm going to take Wild Weasel as one of the new ones because as a kid, I got the Rattler for a Christmas present. So the Rattler, you got Wild Weasel in that. Another cool figure to have along with a cool toy as well.
Yeah, Wild Weasel was like really cool and fun to play with. This was before they kind of went full in on the troopers, right? Because later we get the Strato Viper and he's a nameless character. But Wild Weasel is the best pilot that they have. And so really enjoy seeing him. The issue with him and Ace, that's coming up is incredible. One of the best ones in the whole series. So you got to love Wild Weasel. And the funny thing was in 24, they didn't name him. I don't know if you noticed that. I don't know if that was because they didn't know his name, but he's like the best pilot. And then in 25, they name him Wild Weasel. I thought that was interesting. Is like Firefly and the pilot.
I think they kind of try to keep things mysterious. Even previous issues, like when they introduced Destro, they always kind of kept them mysteriously off. It's that old comic booky trope of let's keep them dangling for a little bit and show up at the end and then, oh, you better buy next issue, figure out what's happening. It's still a cool combination between Wild Weasel and Firefly. To this day, I still think those two are a cool combination together.
Let's roll right into Firefly because I'm going to talk about him a little bit. The last page, issue 24, has 3 major cameos. You don't see any of these characters until the last page with Firefly, Wild Weasel, and then Zartan. And Firefly, as a kid, I wanted that figure so bad, and I could never find it on the pegs. And I had one friend that had it. I didn't pull a Jared. I did borrow him for a little bit because we did a little swap. I can't remember what I traded. I don't remember what I swapped him with.
Okay.
I remember it was like a week or so. We just kind of swapped and then gave it back to each other. I did not share that on the toy episode with Jared because I forgot that I had done that. I didn't abscond on it like Jared did. As a character, Firefly plays a huge part all the way through the comics. He's mysterious. I don't even know if they've shown his face yet. I don't think they have.
Firefly was hard to get. I got him when one of my friends quit collecting and I got his collection. He's like, you can have him.
Oh.
So I had trouble finding him as well. And you're right, like Firefly, and especially I like him early on, being more the saboteur and how they used him throughout the early issues of the comic. He's very mysterious, and I didn't think he needed any more than that. I loved him that way.
I think what you get is kind of the trifecta of anybody that's in a mask and you got the, just the goggles open or you have a mask, because that makes me think, okay, Snake Eyes or Storm Shadow. Now you got this guy. And that's probably what makes Wild Weasel cool is because he's always, it's like, dude, why do you got your helmet on? You're in the Everglades. That's got to be hot walking around in the swamp with the helmet on. You think you're that cool that you need that? I find that surprising that both of you guys said that Firefly was hard to get. I had him as a kid. I think I went to the store and got him and picked him out. So to me, it didn't felt like it was hard to get, but it could have just been in my area that we had him.
Well, aren't you just fancy, Pat?
I know, yeah. I feel like Jared now. I'm fancy pants here. I just find that weird. But,
my Kmart was just not good enough.
Yeah. I obviously didn't have the subs, so man, you're missing out on the Kmart subs. I'm hungry now. I'll be right back, Jim.
Okay. So we got 2 left, Cutter and Tripwire. Who wants to cover Cutter?
I'll take Cutter. When we were preparing, I was telling you, like, obviously the hovercraft is my favorite vehicle. Cutter in the comics was kind of that same utilitarian character like Wild Bill. Anytime you had somebody flying, it was Wild Bill. And anytime it was a ship, the USS Jane or the hovercraft or whatever in the special missions, all those places, it's always Cutter. And so he's that great ship captain all the time. Not maybe as much character as some of the other guys, but so useful. Larry really knew how to use those characters, right? Besides, he came with the best vehicle.
Yes, he did. Pat, you got anything on Cutter?
Very interesting character, at least character design that you have with Cutter, and very memorable character as well. It's got that Boston cap on. I think what's really cool about Joe is you can meld the cartoon and the comic kind of together, because when I'm reading these comics, I'm hearing the voices of the cartoon, right? Which is a cool thing because, now I hear Cutter and he's got that Boston accent talking, and I got the yacht and the yard, and the way the guy was talking that played Cutter's voice is just memorable to me. And I think that's why he stands out as a character, and how Larry uses him throughout the series as well, too, is, he's there, as Doug mentioned, like when you need somebody out at sea, he's the somewhat original guy that was kind of around at this time and is that guy that, hey, I'm the driver. I can take some leadership in this way when we're out here. And you'll see a little bit more of that eventually when Shipwreck comes along, the characters that they use for, water battles and things like that.
Pat, you mentioned you're able to kind of meld and blend the comics and the cartoons together. Devil's Due did a really good job of that when they reintroduced the comic book. And for those that are listening and have not gone back and listened to G.I. Joe Chronicles from the first episode, take a listen because Pat and Jared do a really good job of covering those. Devil's Due did a really good job of kind of taking tidbits of each one and blending them together when they redid that.
Yeah, they definitely did.
All right, so that's the last one, or one more, Tripwire. Pat, you got anything on him?
No, I don't think I had Tripwire as a kid. I knew one of my neighbors that we always played with Joe's had him. There were 3 boys in the family, so someone's getting Tripwire. You got 3 boys for Christmas, and they all like Joe.
You don't get them all the same character.
Yeah, you
can have a bigger collection.
Everybody gets a Snake Eyes. Everybody gets a Storm Shadow, which is a smart thing. It's Tripwire. A comical kind of a character. As Larry wrote the file cards, he's a guy that you think shouldn't be with this kind of material or doing that kind of stuff, but he is. Hence the name Tripwire. He's going to make an explosion or he's going to stop an explosion. I don't know.
Doug, what are your thoughts?
Tripwire, right? I think Larry mostly used him for the comic relief. And a couple of times he got in there to show his ability to disable a bomb of some sort. But, you can't do that every episode. So mostly he's just the comic relief, falling off the dragonfly, tripping over the log as they're all running away. And that was good, right? When we were kids, you'd laugh a little bit about that and then follow on along with the story. So he was fine that way. But I love how Pat says, somebody's got to get Tripwire. Tripwire is another one that I got later on from a friend after he stopped collecting. And I never prioritized him really when I was collecting.
He's like one of those peg warmers. Your mom or your dad, when you go, say, hey, you can get a toy, go pick one out. And you go back there and all of a sudden you start looking around, Tripwire. Oh, man. What did you go, oh, I don't need one right now. I'll wait. Or do you take the advantage and, okay, I guess I got to get Tripwire. Will I be able to get another Joe again later on? I don't know. I need to grab it.
Well, if mom's going to buy him and that's the only one there, then you're getting Tripwire.
Then you're getting it. Yeah, then you're getting Tripwire.
So you're saying he's like the last guy picked for dodgeball?
Maybe. Yeah.
Probably.
All right. So I want to point out that there's one character missing from 1984 that really should have been in these 2 issues, and that's Copperhead. He never showed up in the Marvel comic, ever. The closest he got was in issue 50 when they're evacuating Springfield and there's a sign that says Copperhead, and it was just a group. It wasn't actually Copperhead. So that's the closest he got to being in the Marvel comics. But he really should have been in this one instead of Wild Weasel.
Yeah, especially since the water moccasin is all over these issues, right?
Yep.
And no Copperhead.
I'd like to dig into that sometime and find out why, but I mean, maybe he wasn't created yet. I don't know.
Maybe they had the vehicle and were getting ready, but never told Larry, hey, there's a guy that drives it.
It's possible.
Weird.
Okay, so normally this is where we discuss some non-toy characters, but I didn't find any non-toy characters in these 2 issues, but there are plenty coming up in issue 26 and 27. So that brings us to round 1 of general issues.
We're getting away in the water moccasin! The surface catcher! Joe!
These 2 issues had so much action. The commander escapes, but Storm Shadow is captured and quickly escapes. The Joes and Cobra battle in the Florida Everglades, and a mystery begins to unfold. So, Pat, Doug, let's start by discussing some of the stories, plot lines, and some defining moments from issues 24 and 25. So, Pat, why don't you go first with one of these that you'd like to discuss, and then we'll just roll right through them.
I'll take story point number 1 on 24. I mean, we are in like the best meat and potatoes of the series a little bit here, I think. Starting from 21 and going on here, these are issues I remember as a kid just pouring over until I would get my next issue every month coming in at around this time. And I think my subscription started around the mid 30s or so. So we're getting close to where I was starting to get them monthly delivered in the mail in the brown bag that they would come wrapped in. And 24 with that building of the base, and then you had so many toys to play with in this one. They used the command center to be the base that's on top of the plateau that they set up that should be invulnerable for people to get to. Well, of course, someone's going to get to it if they have the claw, which is another cool toy to play with. And then how are you going to chase the claw if you don't got the Skyhawk? Another cool toy. I had both of those toys, so it was fun to just reenact what was going on with these. You know, I had a Storm Shadow, and so just fun reenacting these comics that were taking place here. And, you know, these were how we learned to play with the toys.
So speaking of toys, Doug, did you have a lot of the vehicles and stuff, or were you more of a figure guy?
No, I had a lot of the vehicles too. Okay. And I definitely had a Skyhawk and a Claw. I didn't get the Fortress until as an adult. I had the Water Moccasin that shows up in this one, and of course Sartan with his swamp skier and all that kind of good stuff. I loved all these things. What really got me about the construction of the prefab fortress the whole time, from the time they land at the beginning of 24 on the top of the mountain, Cobra Commander is just ripping into Duke over and over. It's like, what are you doing? Like, you can't protect me here. Like, you're not going to keep me here. You know, he makes the comment about how constructions and fortresses have gone out with the air support from World War II, right? And things like that. It's just really humorous. And I liked this version of Cobra Commander.
Yeah.
Where he kind of shows he's a little bit more devious, he's strategic minded and that kind of thing. Love that portion of it. And they haven't even figured out how to get his helmet off because of the C4 in it. Was really, really enjoyed that part of this comic book. And I agree with what you said, Pat. Like, these comics, as I got them, I read them until the cover fell off.
I think this is a good place to put one of my talking points or questions for you guys is, was Cobra Commander ever really a prisoner? I mean, he was just kind of moseying around the base, leaning back in his chair, you know, and I mean, he helped them build the base. Was he ever really a prisoner? I mean, come on.
Yeah, it is a little kind of, I don't want to say humorous. It's not the right word. I'm not sure what the right word is, because he feels like he's never lost control the whole time that he was up on that mountain. He gets the call from Storm Shadow and he's like, yeah, I want to go outside. And Duke just obliges.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. Go.
I'm glad you brought it up that way because I didn't see it that way. He feels like he never lost control.
I guess you can think that, and is because he obviously knew Storm Shadow was going to come find him, right? And whatever's in his helmet was sending off a signal, so Storm Shadow knew where to get him. So he's just like, I'm just buying my time. Putting the box together, the command center together was kind of funny just to see him standing there helping out.
So what do you guys think about the reunion between Destro and the Baroness? He showed some surprise, but then it just kind of, oh, you're back. And then they started a conversation. I think that he would have spent a little more time on it.
I think at this moment in the storytelling, we didn't know how deep their relationship was or where it was at. Or maybe that at least Destro didn't want to play his card in that. Then somebody could probably use that as a weakness for him, you know, to try to get the upper hand a little bit more. But obviously Major Blood knew a little bit more of what was happening. So Major Blood definitely knew how to push Destro's button that way.
I think we as a reader knew how deep the relationship was, but everybody else in Cobra, I don't think knew. Is that what you're...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
That's actually a really good point. Destro is one of those cool, calm characters that wouldn't want to play his hand, and especially in front of somebody like Major Blood, right? So maybe that's more of what that's about, right? And the other thing is, I wonder if we're coloring it a bit because of, we know how deep the relationship is. And at that time, it was still, we knew that there was a lot of interest there. Like Destro was definitely thinking about her in 21 and some of the other issues, right? We were still wondering how deep it goes at this point, I think.
All right, Doug, you got one you want to start off?
The Storm Shadow rescuing Cobra Commander and getting caught. That part of the story starts to show a little bit of Storm Shadow, right? He's got that piece where he's going to go and he is going to find Cobra Commander no matter what. Nothing's going to stop him. And then he grabs him and gets into the air with him, and Roadblock shoots one of the engines out. And the whole time Cobra Commander's like, oh, I'm going to pay you all this money and all this kind of stuff. I'll send somebody back for you, et cetera, et cetera. And he's like, just go before I change my mind. It just kind of shows his character. And that really kind of strikes me as, hey, we're starting to get a little bit, because this is the first time where he's been talking. I guess in issue 23, we've got him chasing to make sure our Cobra commander's okay. This really starts to show his character, I think.
Yeah, and then some of that loyalty is more of what you find out later in 26 and 27, and he's trying to find out a secret. I'll just leave it at that until we get to those two issues. I liked how Larry used Roadblock once again to take, I think you and I were talking about that, Pat, in the last comic episode when he took out the Rattler with his big Ma Deuce.
Yeah.
This issue, he takes out the claw.
Definitely. Yeah, he's definitely using the newer characters to their strong points in this, I think. Again, and then what just makes you at awe of what Larry's doing here is just, hey, I got these characters I got to play with, and here's what they like to do. And he's just putting them in the right situations to make you go, wow, that guy's a cool guy.
Yeah, just the way Roadblock handles Storm Shadow, right? So you could argue, well, but Roadblock got that opportunity because he was concentrating on Gung Ho at that moment. But still, the strength of Gung Ho as he takes him down is just awesome.
Yeah, just a lot of, like you said, Jim, a lot of big character building moments early on here that will add up down the road. And we know what this adds up to. Looking back at it now, you can see it. But I think as a kid, when I was reading it, it was like, Doug mentioned it too, is like we were pouring over this and just waiting for the next thing to know more about what these characters were. As we talk about the next two issues, we're definitely going to get some eye-opening moments that we didn't know about, but everybody's hungry for it till this day to kind of continue to get that stuff. You know, and when we talk about him escaping Alcatraz, it's like hindsight 2020, looking back now, oh yeah, it's Storm Shadow. Of course he's going to.
That's what I was thinking about, too, when you were just saying that, is the escape from Alcatraz piece is our first look into the mysterious. We don't know all that much about this ninja yet, right? And we're about to learn about him and find out what he's all capable of. And looking back, yeah, of course he got out of Alcatraz, no problem.
So let's talk about what took a majority of issue 25, the battle in the swamp with the dragonflies, the water moccasin, the shark. These two issues, specifically 25, Larry Hama always has these one issues where he introduces a bunch of new characters and a bunch of new vehicles just to get them out of the way. And then get them out of the way so he can use them later. I love how he utilized all the different characters. We talked about some of the way he used them, the Cobra characters already, the interaction between the Joes. But the battle scene I thought was pretty good. Very action-packed, very one-sided. It was surprising how one-sided it was between the... You think two dragonflies would be able to whop the swamp with a water moccasin, but nope, the shark had to come and save him. I thought it was pretty good.
Not only that, but the fact that the Joes had a plan, right? They dropped off Tripwire, Mutton Junkyard, and Torpedo, dropped them in the swamp, and then distracted the water moccasin, took them away from the Joes that they dropped in the swamp so that the Joes in the swamp get to investigate. They had a backup plan to help the dragonflies because the dragonflies were that distraction to get them away. And you knew you were going to put them in a bad situation that way. So you needed a way to come and get them. And I loved how he thought all that through. Like you said, we know that he's introducing these characters in these toys, right? Because he has to do that. But he does it in such a great way, such a well thought out way. That's what's neat about that whole dragonfly, water moccasin, shark thing, I think.
Again, we keep talking about just Larry and what he had to do. I know that now as an adult or someone that got more into the comics later on. At the time I was reading this, I didn't know he was trying to just pull it in for a toy or whatever. I was like, oh, wow, cool. I'm learning more about these vehicles and these characters. And this is a cool story that he's building and putting together. And now you look at it from my adult eyes going, oh, I see what he's doing. He's just trying to sell toys to me. But, you know, it was working as a kid. I was buying these comics and I'm like, oh, I got to go grab that toy. You know, hats off to Larry building the story up to become that battle of, you know, we mentioned, here's how you play with these toys. Go out and recreate this and have fun. And yeah, I wish I had a water moccasin. I didn't get a dragonfly until like later on when they redid them is when I got a dragonfly, but to have an original dragonfly would have been cool.
Yeah, I didn't have an original dragonfly. My cousin did, but I didn't. But somebody's getting the big dragonfly when it comes in here in what, a couple weeks or so, Doug?
Yeah, they keep sending us emails.
Yeah,
it's coming.
Who's fancy?
Yeah, I see. Battle of the Fancy Pants here.
All right, so we got one more major thing to talk about, and that's Zartan. Pat, what do you think of Zartan and his introduction?
Very good. As a kid reading it, this guy had me intrigued about who he is, what he's all about, wanted to know more, and just to see his development through this series and beyond is just amazing. Pretty cool character.
Again, it comes down to Zartan is, such an intriguing character, right? When we look at it through the eyes of as being an adult reading all of these, the startup is just about right. He doesn't feel like he needs to prove himself. There's even that little argument where Cobra Commander eventually says, okay, Zartan, you need to prove yourself just to get the spotlight off of himself because of that little intrigue with Baroness and Destro and all that kind of stuff. Zartan just kind of keeps his cool and goes, okay, let's go. And he takes care of business. It's a great introduction for Zartan and a character that is just going to mean so much to this entire series.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the 24 and 25 or 26 and 27. I thought it was intriguing how Zartan pretty much took charge over Destro and Cobra Commander. I thought it was intriguing how he just kind of took over and, well, you're doing this, you're doing that. I guess it's his turf, so he knows best.
Yep.
Anything else before we roll on to the next two issues? Anything I missed in our talking points or anything you guys want to bring up?
No, nope. I think you covered it, yeah.
Yeah, I think you got it all.
That takes us to issue 26, Snake Eyes, The Origin, Part 1. Scripter and breakdowns is Larry Hama. Finishes, Steve Leialoha. Lettering, Rick Parker. Coloring, George Roussos. Editor, Denny O'Neil. Editor-in-chief, Jim Shooter. And cover artist was Mike Zeck and Bob Wycheck. Synopsis goes like this. In the Everglades story, Firefly and Wild Weasel escape from Mutt, Torpedo, and Tripwire, who chase after them, attempting to recapture them. Junkyard leads Destro, Baroness, Zartan, and Cobra Commander after the Joes, or so they think. Junkyard actually leads the Cobras into a pit of quicksand, which they fall into. In the pit, Hawk and Scarlet research the meaning of the tattoo that is on both Storm Shadow's and Snake Eyes' arms, the I Ching, but they fail to comprehend its meaning. Stalker says that he had seen that tattoo before as well. He begins the story of Snake Eyes. Stalker was the leader of a long-range reconnaissance patrol, or LRP, unit in Vietnam. On one mission, they lost 3 of the 6 members. Stalker, Snake Eyes, and Tommy, whose last name is unpronounceable, were the surviving 3. Tommy and Snake Eyes were really close. Tommy always tried to talk Snake Eyes into joining the family business back in Japan after the war. As they were getting extracted by helicopter, they were ambushed. Snake Eyes was wounded. Tommy went back and carried Snake Eyes to the helicopter amid heavy Viet Cong fire. As Tommy was pulling Snake Eyes on board the helicopter, that is when Stalker said he first saw the tattoo, plus Tommy put Snake Eyes in some kind of trance. Afterward, Stalker called the records division and found that Tommy's unpronounceable last name translated directly into English as Storm Shadow. Snake Eyes was then sent home from Vietnam because of his wounds, but no one was there to meet him at the airport. Hawk, who was just a junior officer at the time, was sent to retrieve him and tell him that his mother, father, and twin sister had been killed in an accident by a drunk driver. In Spanish Harlem, New York City, a young boy walks into a small Oriental restaurant and pulls out a gun. The owner, an old Japanese man, plays along with the boy and calmly, yet quickly, grabs the gun, drops out the magazine, and tosses the boy $50. He claims that he likes to buy empty pistols. The man drops the gun into a box of pistols that he has collected over the years. The whole time, Snake Eyes has been inside the restaurant in disguise, holding onto an Uzi. The old man starts a historic tale about Snake Eyes. With nothing left in America for Snake Eyes, he went to Japan to take Tommy up on his offer to join the family business. This business turned out to be a ninja clan. The Hard Master, Tommy's uncle, was the chairman of the board. The Soft Master, Tommy's other uncle, was vice president in charge of finance. And Tommy, Storm Shadow, was called the Young Master. Snake Eyes undertook the training and became a ninja and excelled. He was eventually allowed to get his arm tattooed with the I Ching, the symbol of the family. He became superior in most skills, but the Young Master was still superior with the bow. He could even shoot squirrels on the opposite side of the wall with an arrow. Storm Shadow's violent ways became abhorrent to Snake Eyes, and their friendship weakened. In fact, Snake Eyes became so good that the Hardmaster was going to name Snake Eyes as the heir to the family business instead of Storm Shadow. The Hardmaster was assassinated as an arrow flew through the wall and lodging in a piece of wood, killing him. The arrow is Storm Shadow's, and he is seen fleeing the family compound and became the obvious suspect. The Hardmaster had actually been imitating Snake Eyes' heartbeat and breathing in a process called donning the chameleon's mantle. So that meant that Snake Eyes was the actual target. This made Storm Shadow even more of a suspect because it was assumed that he became jealous of Snake Eyes and wanted to kill him. As he died, he claimed that Storm Shadow was innocent, yet all evidence pointed to him. The future Cobra even fled the family business. In the Everglades, Destro has stopped Zartan from shooting Junkyard. He wants to see why a dog is alone out in the swamp and staring out into the trees. The Joe team is out in those trees, angry that Junkyard is giving them away. Doug, why don't you cover issue 27 for us?
Issue 27, Snake Eyes, The Origin, Part 2. Script, Larry Hama. Pencils, Frank Springer. Inks, Andy Mushinsky. Lettering, Rick Parker. Coloring, George Roussos. Editor, Denny O'Neil. Editor-in-Chief, Jim Shooter. And cover artist, Mike Zeck and Bob Wycheck. When we last left Destro, Baroness, Zartan, and Cobra Commander, Junkyard had led them into a pit of quicksand. They are eventually able to get out and continue to pursue Torpedo, Tripwire, and Mutt, who were in turn chasing after their escaped prisoners, Firefly and Wild Weasel. Firefly builds a trap to ensnare his pursuers, only to have Junkyard set it off. The Cobras eventually group back together and continue to chase the Joes, only to find out they have disappeared into the swamp. That is when Zartan utters his line, "Time to call in the Dreadnoks." As the story of Snake Eyes' background continues, Hawk reveals that after he told Snake Eyes about his family's death, he hadn't heard from him for 6 years. When he and Stalker were putting the G.I. Joe team together, they decided to track Snake Eyes down. They found that he had retired to the seclusion of a cabin in the High Sierras where he was living with his pet wolf, Timber, and catching rabbits with his bare hands. They talked him into coming with them and joining the G.I. Joe team. Scarlet first met Snake Eyes when the three returned to headquarters. She was putting the new recruits through their paces in hand-to-hand combat drills. But when she fought Snake Eyes, she could tell how good he was because he let her win. He was so good, he didn't have anything to prove. Scarlet was slowly falling in love with him as the friendship grew. Months later, the team was split into 2 helicopters on their way to a hostage rescue. They were flying low and kicking up a lot of sand. The chopper Scarlet and Snake Eyes were in stalled, probably due to sand in the engine intake. The pilots had just told the team to make a jump for it when the tail rotor stalled and the helicopter spun towards the ground, slamming the chopper door shut on Scarlet, trapping her in the helicopter as it lost control. Snake Eyes went to help her, but the Huey was hit by the rotors of another helicopter. The aviation gas exploded, causing a stream of burning vapor to slam into Snake Eyes' face directly through the window. The resulting explosion hit Snake Eyes directly in the face and throat. The wounds were so great that his face was permanently scarred and he could no longer speak. In Spanish Harlem, Snake Eyes having a conversation with the Softmaster in New York. The Softmaster reveals that he's investigating the death of the Hardmaster. He wants to know why the Hardmaster denied on his deathbed that the killer was not Storm Shadow despite evidence to the contrary. One bit of evidence is the killing arrow, which came from Storm Shadow's personal supplies. As he's telling this to Snake Eyes, Storm Shadow crashes through the window and takes the arrow from the Softmaster. Thus starts a foot chase of Storm Shadow by Snake Eyes through the streets of New York. The chase ends in a face-off with knives on top of a subway car speeding along its rails. Storm Shadow, whose back is to the oncoming tunnel, tells Snake Eyes that he loves him like a brother, but won't let him stop himself from doing what he needs to do. He will kill him if necessary. Snake Eyes allows Storm Shadow to leap at him, moving him out of danger from the oncoming tunnel and saving his life. The Cobra Ninja realizes that his former friend has repaid his life debt and leaves in peace. But Storm Shadow tells him what his important task is. He reveals that the only reason he is a member of Cobra is because he knows that someone in Cobra was the actual killer of the Hardmaster. He has spent years working his way up in Cobra to find out the identity and someday avenge his uncle's death. At the pit, Scarlet hears the police report of a fight between a masked man with an Uzi and a ninja in white. She immediately leaves to go and try and help.
All right. Well, with issues 26 and 27 details out of the way, we are going to move into our second round of supporting the troops. In supporting the troops, round 2, seems we have the opposite of what we had on the first round. There were one toy-inspired character that was introduced in these issues, but we have several non-toy characters that were introduced. So let's go through some of these. So the toy-inspired character is Timber. And ooh, man, what a cool character Timber is. And then the non-toy-inspired characters, we have the Softmaster, the Hardmaster, Arashikage Ninja Clan, LRRP, the LARP team members, not named yet. We'll go to Jim. Who would you like to discuss, either of the toy-inspired or the non-toy-inspired?
I'm going to go with Timber for a couple of reasons. First of all, as you said, Pat, he's pretty cool. Larry doesn't use them a whole lot, but when he uses them, it's spot on. Issues 30 to 31, I think, are ones that really come to mind. When he's up in Snake Eyes' cabin, there's one in the 90s. And he's not a toy yet either. This is 84, so he's not a toy until 85. I don't know if the comic inspired the toy or toy inspired the comic. I don't know which, chicken and egg. As I was talking with Doug before the show, I have a German Shepherd Husky mix. He's all white, except for a little tan strip down the back, and his name is Timber. That's how he got his name, was through G.I. Joe. Which
has also obviously inspired your toy collection thing that you go under. Yeah, your name Timbers, that you go under there. Yep,
Timbers Toys and Customs. So, yep.
You can't fool me, Jim. I knew there was something going on. This was another toy, as we talked about in Junkyard, Timber and Snake Eyes. It's like two cool characters with some cool dogs, or a wolf, obviously, as one of them. But, still a cool animal to have with you. And I remember when getting that Snake Eyes with that really cool outfit change, you get this wolf with it too. It's like, how badass is that?
Pretty cool.
It's just pretty cool. Yeah. Doug, do you have anything on Timber?
I like the introduction, right? I like the fun that Larry's having with it, with Hawk thinking that it's Snake Eyes because of the townspeople telling him that he's a werewolf or what have you. So kind of a fun way to introduce Timber. We're going to get to know Timber a lot during later issues. But the fun introduction, and now he's there. We know he's there, and he's Snake Eyes' pet. And only Snake Eyes could have a wolf as a pet.
Yeah, exactly. With you just mentioning that of, the townspeople thinking this guy's some hermit or kind of like that, takes me back to the cartoon when we first meet Timber, right? Because of the old guy that's blind and a hermit and comes and kind of helps Snake Eyes. So I wonder if there's maybe a little callback to that. I don't know.
I was just thinking about that because 83 is when Timber was introduced in their cartoon.
Mm-hmm.
So even before the comic. So
he was there.
Yeah.
Interesting to see how they played that in and whose decision it was. Ooh, everybody liked the dog that was in the cartoon. Let's bring him into the rest of the world and the toys and the comics. So, Doug, do you want to pick any of the non-toy inspired ones?
Well, I would pick the Softmaster. And the way they introduced him with the calm, cool collectiveness, kind of to set the character of the kid holding up his shop, just talking to the kid like normal, and like the description said, takes the weapon from him, and he tells him, you can't shoot me, the safety's on. And then he turns on the safety and he just unloads the weapon and takes it from him and puts it into a box. I was like, that is cool. How did he do that? Like, how did he know to do that, right? And he's, not to go into his looks, but he's really a non-assuming character when you look at him, right? He's like shorter and not fit ninja, but it's still there. And I just love that. I love that part of the Softmaster. And I wish that Larry had kept him around a lot longer.
Yeah, he'd be a cool guy to have around for this. Hardmaster, neat kind of guy. We don't get a lot of him just because of what happens to him, but you can definitely tell that the Hardmaster, definitely top of his skills in order to even to pretend to be breathing and doing the skill that mimics Snake Eyes. Just a guy that you definitely want to learn from and sees the potential into Snake Eyes that way. Never's gotten a figure of the Hardmaster at all, Jim?
In the modern, the 2005 and on, there was some.
But nothing at this time.
Not in the vintage 82 to 94, no. Yeah, similar to Quinn and the Softmaster and Bongo the Balloon Bear, and never got those.
Anybody have anything else on the Hardmaster?
I'm good. I'm going to talk about Rashikage Ninja Clan. When these were introduced in these two issues, I had to go back and read these. So I had a little bit of idea of the Ninja Clan already.
Okay.
And when they jumped out of the floor, like, what in the heck? How many are there? When they were in black, what are they, geese instead of the red? There was no tie back to the Red Ninja yet. The whole idea of it was pretty neat.
Yeah, like if you're reading these in order, you'd seen Red Ninjas, but you didn't tie them to the Rashikage clan, right? You just thought those were the Cobra Ninjas, right? And it's only later that you get that connection between the two. I do love that where they're coming out of the floor and the ceiling, and they're coming from everywhere, right? So it's awesome.
I'll bring up the next with the LRRP team members, seeing Tommy, Stalker, and Snake Eyes, seeing them together like that. Pulling in Stalker like that was a cool move to do. It just ties him back to the originality of G.I. Joe as well, too. Then you have him, you have Snake Eyes. This takes me back to the 80s with the movies that come around at that time. One of the films that I really, really love is Uncommon Valor. Oh, man. The guys that'll do anything for their buddies, that camaraderie that we saw in those 80 movies like that. That was one of the films that really meant a lot to me, watching it as a kid. And I could see some G.I. Joe in it and understand the feelings that Larry was putting into that. Obviously, Larry, being a vet himself, he's putting some heart into this as well, too. I could definitely get what he was trying to portray.
Yeah, absolutely. Larry, definitely, this was something that he wrote from the heart, like you said, through experience, probably. What I was going to bring up was, as I mentioned, the first time I read any part of this origin story was in issue 43. And they name the other three members of the LRP team. And this is one of the reasons why I like going back and doing these. Rereading this, Larry didn't name those three in this issue.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that until this read through. I'm like, oh, okay. He left that open. And that was the other thing. Knowing what's coming in the next 120 some issues, there's points where he kept it open so he could insert some of this other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I guess he was able to was more of a term for it.
That is something Larry is really good at, right? Leaving himself openings to expand upon the story later. And he does definitely do that in this case. He mentions there's three others, but he doesn't name them, so he can do whatever he wants in the future with it. Like, he's really good at that. I wanted to go back for just a second to what Pat was saying, because like I said, 27 is the first one I bought, and I bought it because I read my friend's number 26. And these two things were my first. My dad was a Vietnam vet, and he did not talk about it. Hardly at all.
Yeah,
a lot of Vietnam vets didn't, especially in the early 80s before all the parades and stuff started. This was my first thing where I kind of read and I was like, oh, this is a little bit of a flavor, just a little, right? I'm not saying it's exactly like it, of what maybe my dad went through. And that was part of the hook. It wasn't the whole hook, but it definitely was part of the hook, because G.I. Joe was a way for me to talk to Dad about his military stuff. He talked a lot about being stationed in Panama and some other places beforehand, but he didn't talk about Vietnam all that much up until almost he passed away. So that was part of the hook for me. Very personal reason of why I was like, oh, I'm in, and then just continue to follow Larry along.
Definitely. I can definitely relate to what you're saying. My dad was in the Marines at the time and stationed in certain areas. And I don't know if I mentioned it in here or maybe it wasn't. I talked to Joe so many places. One of the things that I still have is, that hat that Snake Eyes wears. I can't remember. Jared told me it when I brought it up.
Boonie hat?
Yeah, the boonie hat is. I had my dad's like that. I would put that on and, oh, look at me, I'm Snake Guy, but that meant a lot to me because that was my dad's hat. Tying those together, and like you said, he doesn't really talk that much about what he did. And my mom's brothers, she had several brothers, and they were all in service at that time too, in the Marines and the Army and different things. When I got time to spend a little bit with them too, they didn't really talk much about it. And of course, you don't want to pry at all either, but just the respect that I have for them, the understanding, even through this little comic that could at least show you a glimpse of maybe a little bit that they went through, or just the camaraderie that they had with the people they were with. Could definitely feel for that. And one thing I have is when we were at Dragon Con this year, I was able to get from Larry his challenge coin from him. So I bought that from him. And while we were there, the cool thing that Larry did is I was there with Jared. Jared asked him, hey, could I get a challenge coin from you? Larry asked him, did you serve? And Jared said, yes, he served in the Air Force. And Larry just gave it to him. And just like, wow, that's cool that how Larry takes care of former military vets and all that. Just really respected Larry for what he did. Really neat to see.
That's pretty neat. I've been to his booth before and seen those challenge coins, and I may have to get one from him. I know I'll have to pay the $30.
The $30, yeah. I paid. I'm like, okay, I didn't serve, but I'll pay it. I think it's something unique to have from him, and to see him interact with Jared and that camaraderie that was there because they served. It's like, you could definitely tell that what he was writing showed off in that interaction that I saw between him and Jared.
All right. Anything further before we move on to general issues? I think we've covered all the characters, so let's roll into general issues round 2. These 2 issues focus on what could be considered the conclusion to round 1 of the battle in the Everglades and Snake Eyes' origin, which Larry will return to many times for the remainder of the comic. Pat, Doug, let's start by discussing some of the stories, plot lines, and some defining moments from issues 26 and 27. And let's get the non-Snake Eyes origin stuff out of the way. Then we'll just kind of cover the Snake Eyes origin as we break it down. That way we don't have to keep going back and forth. I'm going to open up with, we touched on it a little bit before, but Junkyard betraying the Joes. Now, what I find funny is, what was one of the biggest threats in the 70s and 80s on TV shows and movies that we thought was going to be a lot more prevalent in our life than what it was?
Quicksand?
Quicksand. How many TV shows had quicksand in it? And I have never seen quicksand in my entire life.
It was definitely a common trope, right?
Oh, yeah.
And I think it started in the 60s because didn't Batman fall into some quicksand at some point?
Probably. I just remember it was Gilligan's Island. I'm sure there was one on Dukes of Hazzard or something. It was just all over the place. But Junkyard betraying the Joes, that was just his way of protecting them. I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah. I think that's what made you really fall in love with Junkyard, is that through the series, you see him leaving Mutt to go and be with the bad guys, but then you actually see that he's just leading them on to get them back to where Mutt is, so then they can overcome them in that. So it's like, wow, I like this dog. It's a pretty cool dog. He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, it's awesome when he trips the trap that Firefly set before the Joes get there, right? Just that he sniffs those things out and figures it out. It makes you love the dog just that much more from the start.
Who wants to take another item? Doug, how about you?
I think Zartan and the Baroness and Destro and Cobra Commander going through the marshes of the swamp there and getting dirty and going after the Joes. It's fun to see because you don't see that many of the Cobra High Command doing something like that as the book goes along, right? They're always ordering the Vipers or the Cobra officers out there to do that kind of stuff, and they're not doing it. So this story is unique in that respect, and we get to see them, actually go out and try to capture the Joes that are lurking around the base there for Zartan's cabin. So very enjoyable seeing that, and then even better when they get stuck in the quicksand, as you spoke, Jim. I mean, it's a lot of fun to see them doing that kind of stuff.
Currently, there aren't that many trooper-style figures. Larry has to use the main characters for some of this stuff, so they got to get their boots dirty.
And that's the beauty of those earlier issues, was that all the named characters are doing everything. You got to love that part of the series.
Yeah, you bring a good point there, Doug, of just the slow building of an empire, right? From Cobra Commander and what he has become and what his whole Cobra becomes. It gets so big and big and bigger, and, then you get Serpentor and then everything going on like that. It just becomes huge. And it goes back to why is Destro kind of watching himself? They're all new and they're all trying to get to understand each other too in this development, because as we know, Cobra has a problem with people fighting for positions, where in Joe, you don't have people fighting for positions. They're working as a team. That's the instability of Cobra is, are you really a team? Are you really no, you're all out for you're a bunch of pirates. You're out for yourselves, but you want to be together and have some kind of coalition, but everybody's out for themselves and, out for number one. Yeah.
Every one of them knows how to do it better than the other one.
That sounds a lot like corporate life, right? All right. So something that got overshadowed by the Snake Eyes origin is just this battle in the Everglades. The back and forth we've talked about with the Cobra Commander and Destro and Baroness all getting their hands dirty, and the Joes going back and forth. And similar to what I would call a vehicle battle in 24 and 25, this on the ground battle was I thought it was pretty good. Just the way you use the characters and their specialties. And what are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I agree that you have some dense stuff going on with character development with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow, and you have all that going on, that you have this nice little breakup or in between things happening with the Joes and Cobras in the Everglades. That kind of battle still kind of finishing up, I guess, as far as what Larry was telling from the other issues. You kind of get to finally see the kind of conclusion of that happening, and really puts it together pretty good. Just gives you that breather too of all that extra stuff that he's throwing at you.
Yeah, and he uses each one's capabilities, right? He uses Firefly as setting a trap, and Destro uses his wrist rockets to knock down the trees so they can get out of the quicksand. And I like that kind of how he uses all the characters in the battle as the Joes are chasing Wild Weasel and Firefly, and then it all gets turned around on them. But yet the Joes are saved by Junkyard, like we were talking about a second ago. It's really good use of all the characters, giving them all a little bit of spotlight. And why I like the stories in the line so much is you have lots of different fun little expertise that you could use together.
Absolutely.
I just want to bring up one more thing that I just realized talking about Zartan and his cabin area. Just because Jared and I recently in reading through the next series of the Devil's Due run, Zartan goes back to this area to recover something that is precious to him. And he goes back to this cabiny area there, that there's something that he needs to get that helps him. And I don't want to give it away, because if you're not reading that series, you definitely need to, because just the callback to this time, I'm just realizing it now myself. So it just, wow, the people that have so much love for Joe are all harking back to stuff like this.
Devil's Due, I've said it before, was great at going back and getting that stuff and tying it into these early issues. They were just really good at it. And if you don't want to read the issues, you can go back and listen to G.I. Joe Chronicles. Pat and Jared do a really good job of covering the issues.
Definitely go back and listen to them, and we definitely have some fun. So
I do remember that story in America's Elite. 2-issue story, wasn't it?
It's a 2-issue back issue story.
Back issue, that's right.
Yeah, it's like a second, it's like the second story that's going on in America's Elite for 2 issues, and it's a great story. And
it is. Wow. And it's got Xandar in it. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's got everybody with disease in it.
So that kind of rolls us into the main event for tonight, and that is Snake Eyes' origin. Now, we could probably spend a whole another 2 hours discussing this whole thing. So I don't know how we're going to break this down or condense this, but I don't want to skim it because there's a lot of information.
Yeah.
But let's just go down. We'll start with the LERP team. And we touched on it a little bit already with, introduction of Stalker, and he was the first one to meet Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes. And is there anything we haven't already discussed that you guys want to bring out about that?
I think just the friendship and the camaraderie is already apparent there, right? When you hear Stalker talking about how close Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are, of course, he's saying Tommy and Snake Eyes. You start to see that camaraderie, and I think we said it a little earlier, but it kind of goes back to, I think, and I can't be for sure, that how Larry looks at his brother in arms that he had to go through that with, right? And he shows that that's what you're really there for. That's how they came together. And I think that's the key, right, to the LERP team. And he continues to build on that. Like you talked about 43, like when they bring in the other 3 and start talking about that, how that all went down and how it turned out and what Stalker and Snake Eyes do to help some of the other guys later on. Yeah. I think that's the strength and why we all love that team so much and those characters in there.
You ask anybody, as you mentioned, that served, and that's what they really, not trying to get too deep, but that's what they miss when they come home. Mm-hmm. They have a hard time finding that camaraderie and stuff.
Yeah,
it's ingrained in them at that point. And this is the part where, in Snake Eyes' origin, where Hawk's brought in. Pat, what do you think about that scene? It's not a good scene.
It's a tough thing for that somebody in that position that you have to kind of deliver that news to, whether it's to that service member or the reverse of that is providing that information to a spouse, a wife, a family member. It's something we all dread and don't want to happen, whether it be somebody coming to get you because something happened to one of your family members. It definitely pulls on your heartstrings. Tough thing to do as a leader, and it takes certain people that they can actually be able to provide that information to somebody and actually help that person at that time to help them move forward into the next step.
And as Hawk mentioned, he was still pretty young in his career.
Yeah.
This is one of his first things he had to do, and it sounds like we keep raising Larry on a pedestal, but I don't know that any other writer could have handled that message like he did.
Yeah.
But as far as the origin goes, that's where Hawk met Snake Eyes. And a couple years, he was sitting there going, I guess I'm going to go ahead and go train. Doug, what do you think about the Rashikage training? And before you start, when I first started reading Joe, it confused me for a little bit because I'm thinking, so you have Storm Shadow, who's Japanese, but he served in the U.S. military, and they went to Japan for training. But then later on, he lived in San Francisco or something, I think, wasn't it? That confused me for a little bit. It's like, how is that possible? But when he went back to Japan for training, what'd you think of that?
When you put together what we've already discussed about how close they were and because they had served together, and when you take away everything that Snake Eyes had to go home to, it made a lot of sense. Like, I'm going to reach out to those people that were there for me back in Vietnam and get back with Tommy. He invited me to be a part of the business, right? And yeah, that was maybe a little confusing at first. Is like, well, why is the family in Japan if you were serving the U.S.? Because I remember thinking something similar like that at one time. I could be wrong, but I thought that Storm Shadow's card, though, said that he was born in California or something like that.
And that may be. I wasn't fancy and had a Storm Shadow figure back in the day, so I didn't know that. But yeah, that may be where I later on learned, that's why he served, because he was in San Francisco.
Well, I'd go get Carson's book, but it weighs too much. I'm not going to do that right now.
It's in the house. I'm not going to go get it. I'm not going to put 20 pounds on my lap.
Yeah. But I think it was fitting. You go to where you trust somebody, and there's not going to be any more trust than they had for each other, right? So especially when you put on top of that Tommy's the one who went back to pick him up and carry him out of that place, right? And they refer, not for the last time, to the picture of his sister. All of that together, right, makes a lot of sense where he went and why he went. He probably felt like there was nowhere else to go, and that's what I got out of reading it anyway.
Probably because he had nothing else to do, but he really poured himself into the training, and that's one of the reasons why he excelled. He had nothing else to really hang his hat on. Mm-hmm. Everybody else he knew was gone, except for Tommy. Pat, thoughts on the training? Anything that you saw that you were like, hey, that was pretty neat? Or
No, I think you guys covered it pretty well. As a kid reading this, again, it just reminds me of those 80s movies and, someone falling on some hard times, and in order for them to get themselves out of that, putting their focus into something, what better way, become a ninja,
That's the best way.
Yeah, the best way. But you can definitely understand where, like you said, his focus was the training. And I think we mentioned this before when talking about the silent issue, and that is There's probably people that don't understand what that symbol means and what it is, but this is what really kind of starts to solidify that symbol in the G.I. Joe fans, where if you see that, you're like, oh, dude, I know what that is. And Jim, you got the tattoo. I want the tattoo.
Yeah.
I'm just, I'm like, oh man, how am I going to do it? When am I going to do it? But it's definitely something as a kid that I was like, oh, cool. I want a tattoo like that. And, who hasn't wanted to do that? Wanted to be part of that clan.
Absolutely. After the training, during the training, because the Hardmaster was talking to Snake Eyes about taking over the clan, and that's when he got killed. And this is another point where Larry left it wide open for him to insert stuff later. He just said, yeah, he was killed. Somebody flew away in a helicopter. That was it.
And the beauty of that is that it's left open if he wants to do it. If he doesn't want to do it, it doesn't have to. It's still open to interpretation or just speculation.
So I know, like we've said this probably way too much this episode, but just because these are such great issues that we all think about. But what did he leave open? Like he left open, he gave himself like the arrow that shot the squirrel right through the wall, and still all the characters aren't putting all that together yet. Like until Storm Shadow, I think, says it at the very end of 27, right? When he finally does, he says, that's the arrow I shot the squirrel through the wall, and somebody used it.
Yeah, it wasn't me.
And it wasn't me, but he left it open. So he's got that open, and he's got all of this open that he can just use however he wants when he wants. He just is a master at that. Like it always amazes me how he does that.
If Larry Hama was in the Arashikage clan, he would be the story master.
That is awesome. Yes, the story master.
Good one, Pat. So that brings us to when Hawk and Stalker are creating G.I. Joe, and they visit the cabin. We touched on it a little bit when we talked about Timber, but just to revisit it, I thought it was funny the first time I read it. Was that a werewolf? Is that him?
Especially for a general. Come on,
yes. Like, Stalker's like, what are you talking about, man?
He thinks Outpost for sissies.
Yeah, aren't you going to leave that animal alone? He'll be fine. Don't worry about it. But no, I thought that visit was pretty good. You guys' thoughts? Anything further on that?
I think it just gives that mystery of Snake Eyes again. Who he is, what he is, and why. And a great build up to what we find out.
Yeah, I mean, it does. It also is kind of a light way of providing a little levity in the middle of the story. So it's not all tragedy over and over again, right? It's good because you can't just be all tragedy all issue long, right?
No, you got to have some levity in there. And the next item we're going to talk about is Scarlett's training, relationship, and a helicopter accident. The relationship in there throughout starting an issue probably really early on. Larry started hinting at that, and then he really laid it out and said, hey, they're an item, or they want to be an item.
Well, she's worried about him when they're missing, when him and Quinn are missing.
Sierra
right around
Gordo,
there, the teens.
I just couldn't remember if there were any points in 1 through 9 or not. Sierra Gordo, there's that little tear out of her eye when she's jumping out of the plane, and then she gets the letter Hawk gets the letter from Snake Eyes, and it's just for Scarlett. But let's talk about the training and the helicopter accident.
That's Snake Eyes, right? Why he doesn't talk, right? And so when we think about it, we think he never talked, but he did. They all met him when he talked in Vietnam, when Hawk went to talk to him, when they went to get him for the G.I. Joe team. It's really only after this accident. And that's the Snake Eyes we know for the most part. The way that Larry played that in the comic book, even while they're telling this story, he's not talking. Even though all that time before the helicopter accident, he could be talking if Larry wanted him to, but he doesn't. Like, he keeps that part of his character going while telling the story of before he lost his voice.
He keeps that mystery going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the accident. And this is another part where he kept it open a little bit for later on. What mission were they on? Later on, you find out that it was a mission to save, his sister's fiance, George Strawhacker, I think was his name.
I think, too, is with this, we get a little detail about Scarlett and her skills. Obviously, she is a highly leveled, skilled in hand-to-hand combat in that. Then she meets Snake Eyes, and she can tell right away, hey, this guy let me win. she probably fought tons of different people, all, shapes, sizes, and whoever. And then she can kind of tell that this guy is letting me win. There's something, why is he letting me win? He could obviously take me down, but he doesn't have anything to prove. That's a good tell of how strong Scarlet is as a character, or just her skill levels that she has. She is at Snake Eyes' level in some ways.
Yeah, I think that the Snake Eyes let her win so that she didn't lose face with the rest of the team, because he also knew how good she was. He didn't want the rest of the team to think different of her because he could beat her.
Yeah, 100%. Like, this is why we are so invested in Scarlet, is because Larry wrote her as a strong character, not the female character, a strong character that we all, have a lot of respect for, right? And the fact that she can tell how good Snake Eyes is just from how he's fighting with her, there's your credibility. You've got it. We don't need to question it anymore.
Absolutely. And I like the way you put that, Doug. She's a strong character.
Mm-hmm.
People always add, and I've done it before, strong female character. Well, yeah, she is. The way he wrote her, as you said, is a strong character. Strong leader. There were times where people had to rely on her for leadership. Anything on the origin that we missed before we go into the final battle through New York? Anything we missed? Because I don't want to overlook anything. This origin will keep coming up.
Yeah, for sure.
There is a lot to mine in here, and I think there's a lot that did get mined from here, whether it be Larry or other people that have kind of taken the torch and run with it for these particular characters. It's a story that has definitely held the test of time.
I mean, Larry's expanded on all the way up through, well, he's still writing about Snake Eyes. He did some Devil's Due stuff. He did the IDW stuff, and now he's doing it for Skybound. So I do want to touch base a little bit. Devil's Due did the whole Snake Eyes Declassified. I think it was a 6-issue series. And if you have not read that, it's actually pretty good. I believe Larry Hama helped write it. He gave him some notes, but it delves even farther into those years where he was kind of wandering. It's a really good series if you haven't read it yet. Yeah, I'm sure it's collected somewhere if you wanted to order it. So let's talk about Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow's battle through New York. Two very evenly, as we've learned in issue 21, very evenly matched individuals. So anything you guys want to bring out on the battle?
I mean, the thing that always resonated with me was that last part where Snake Eyes could have stood there and watched Storm Shadow get hit by the tunnel, but he doesn't. This is why Snake Eyes is who he is and why we all grew to love him so much, right? Is because he was not out there just to hurt and kill people. That's not who he was. He was like trying to do the right thing all the time, one way or the other. And him jumping back, saving his friend in the way that he knew how, and hearing Storm Shadow out is who he was.
It kind of, as we just talked about with him and Scarlet, he gave in. He's like, okay, I let her win, so she kept her status, her appearance in front of everybody. Now I'm just going to let the Storm Shadow kind of win, so he doesn't get killed, because I don't, he's my brother. We've been through a lot. I don't want to see that happen to him, and I owe him. I don't want to see him just get clobbered. Hey, buddy, duck. And plus he couldn't talk.
I was going to say, you can't talk, Pat.
You can't talk. So reading this through again, I just realized that too, is that play of he did it for Scarlet, now we did it for Storm Shadow as well. It's cool storytelling again by Larry.
He definitely wrote it to where both people could come out on top and be who they are, really.
Oh, I keep saying this. This is an 80s ninja movie that I want to see.
I'm going to try to find some American Ninja music or something and put it in, as for some of this segue here. Doug, you got anything on the battle?
Nothing more. It was fun to see the chase and the run through New York, and you can see a little bit of Larry's love for New York there, and then the battle on top of the train. It was fun. I think we've said it all.
And then some. So, listeners, let us know your thoughts on what we discussed, or if you missed something that you thought was a great moment or storyline from these 4 issues. Share it on Facebook, X, YouTube. Put a comment, and we'll have some discussion. All right. Now we're going to roll into the final comic book segment we are calling Taking Cover.
Take cover!
In this segment, we will be discussing the covers of the comics, these bright and action-packed images that caught our attention and made us want to pick up the issue and see what's happening in the story. The cover should represent what happens in the comic. Overall, the Marvel run of G.I. Joe comics did a good job of this. First, which of the issues we've discussed did the best job of representing the storyline and action that happened in the comic? And second, which cover was your favorite? They don't have to be the same answer. So, Doug, go ahead and share with us what one did the best action and which one you really liked the cover of.
So it's hard to pick best representation because, like you just said, Pat, in this era, they did that more often than not. They were representing it somewhere on that. So, man, all of these were really good as far as representation goes. You know, I'm actually going to pick, I think, as best representation, number 24.
Okay.
Because, you know, if I go through them all, it's Roadblock tackling Storm Shadow right there as Cobra Commander flies away, which is exactly what happens like in the comic. And yeah, they do it right in front of the fortress, but that's okay. I really think that was the best representation. My favorite comes back to, it's number 27, the very first one I ever bought. And let me tell you, I still have that original floppy. It is torn to heck. And
the best kind.
I know. And I took it and I got Larry to sign it. And I put it in front of him. I'm like, listen, this is going to be worth nothing to anybody but me because it's so torn up. But will you sign this? Because this is the best one. And it's my favorite from a personal standpoint. So
as we were going into this segment, I'm looking at issue 27 and I'm going, how cool would this be to have a poster size of this, but like back in the 80s where the neon-y stuff would kind of light up, you know,
the glow in the dark stuff.
Glow in the dark. Oh man, that would be so cool. Somebody out there, if you could do that and let us know, put it wherever you can put it. I want to go out and I want to buy it from you. That would be really cool to have that way. So we'll go ahead and go to Jim. What's yours?
Well, I'm going to be a copycat to Doug. What I think the best representation is 24. You just look at it and you go, yep, that's what happened. Exactly what happened in that issue. And my favorite, well, I'm not a complete copy. I'm going with 26 for my favorite cover. When I got my first copy of this issue 26, I sat there and I stared at it. Are there any hints of the origin on here? Or what do the words say? There's actually words you can read on some of that. It's not just like little scribbly lines. So 26 is my favorite. And the 24 is the best representation. How about you, Pat?
I'm with you, Jim, and Doug on 24. When you go back and you look at what represents the story, I think Doug said it just right, that it encapsulates everything of that story into that image. And it's just so, these are just so iconic issues to me. Like Doug said, poring over these over and over. I would do my summer rereads through these, and then you would go and talk with your buddies and your friends around the schoolyard and just the fun. But like you, Jim, as far as my favorite cover, I think nostalgic for me, it's 26. It's the origin story cover that we get, and the at last, and the strangest secret of all, and you see Snake Eyes, and some of the stuff like you said, trying to decipher who's that girl in that picture, what's the stuff that's written by the arrow and the symbol, the metal, just all that stuff that's just intriguing. And now that I read it over and over so many times, I know what those stuff are and what it means. So it's just really cool and nostalgic feel for me.
Yes. They were all great covers, but I think all three of us picked some really good ones. All right. Due to the nature of our content today and how much we had to discuss with, the origin, the Snake Eyes, and we're going to skip the military surplus. We'll take that up, what we're going to cover. And just for a hint, it was all about stickers. So those of you listening, we're going to be talking about stickers next time. That brings us to the end of the show. Pat, any closing or overall thoughts?
I just want to say I really enjoyed talking to you guys about these 4 issues. Such a time in my life as a child, as a kid, going through these and being able to experience them. Talking with Doug, he was right there with me, kind of in those trenches, reading these stories as they were coming out. Jim, your thoughts of looking backwards at it, just talking with you guys and having some fun, it really means a lot. And these are what podcasts are made for,
Getting to know each other and having a good time, just reminiscing. Doug, first of all, thank you for coming on and joining us. It was great getting to know you. And do you have any overall thoughts of what we discussed today?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. Really enjoyed it. And I'm kind of in the same place as Pat, I think. I started the podcast off talking about how I came in through the toys and then got hooked on because of 26 and 27. And it really cemented how much I love Joe and it kept me going for years to come, pouring over these stories, enjoying what Larry was writing and providing for us. I mean, it was a gift. 100% love talking to you guys about it. You can feel how much you guys like it too. And that's what makes me enjoy this show so much. So thank you very much for having me on.
No problem. Listeners, thank you for joining Pat, Doug, and myself for this episode of G.I. Joe Outpost. Pat and Doug, thank you again for spending some time discussing some great comics. Doug, if our listeners want to contact you, where can they find you?
There's two ways. On X, I am StratoViper72. It's all going to be G.I. Joe or Van Halen stuff. So if you follow me at all on X, that's what you're going to see. But more of me personally and my family is Bradley Douglas Dellow on Facebook is the other place. Love to talk to any Joe friends in either one of those places.
And Pat, how about you? Where can listeners find you?
Well, Jim, I am glad you asked. You can find me on the X at Kristatos01. Where can you be found, Jim?
You can find me on Facebook as Jim Miel, Jimmiel. Make sure it's not the one with the snake eyes holding a flag. Make sure it's me with a baseball hat and sunglasses on a beach. My brother was actually tricked a couple days ago with that one that got hacked.
Hey, Jim, you must be a popular guy.
Yeah.
That's Zartan. He got you. He got
me. He got me. Also on Facebook, Timbers Toys and Customs, where I share some of the shows I'm going to be at, some of the customs, which has been kind of lean lately, and also on X as Jim the Joe Junkie. And in closing, I want to thank everyone at the LONGBOX CRUSADE Network for adding G.I. Joe Outpost to their extensive line of shows. Take a listen to all the other shows that are on the LONGBOX Crusade on any podcatcher or on YouTube. And if you like what you hear, go to Patreon and become a Crusader Club member where you get all the access. Where we hit 50, didn't we, Pat?
We did, Jim. Definitely.
Nice.
Yeah, by the time this comes out, there's probably a special recording that is done for Crusaders Club only for hitting 50 members. I believe Delvin and Jarrett will be watching or have watched at this time Flash Gordon from the 80s.
80s. Okay.
Good choice. I will be watching that.
Join us next time where we will be discussing some episodes of the Sunbow G.I. Joe cartoon.
Yo, Joe!
The music themes for this show are done by musical genius Joe November. Please check out his SoundCloud at Josephline99. That's Josephline99. You will not regret it.